Mirror Talk Episode 17, Triggered Tongue, Speaking While Activated, Pausing Before Projection. Welcome back to Mirror Talk, the language of the nervous system. Today's episode begins in a familiar place. That split second when something tightens inside and the words are already halfway out before we have even felt the impact of the emotion behind them. The comeback, the defense, the accusation, the cold silence, the sharp correction. We didn't plan. The moment we realize we are no longer speaking from intention, but from activation. The moment the mouth gets ahead of the mind. Most people think of a trigger as an emotional feeling, anger, panic, shame, or overwhelm. But in nervous system terms, a trigger is first a shift in physiology, and only then a shift in meaning. The body fires first, and the story follows. We don't choose what we feel in that instant. We only choose what we do next. And most of us don't choose, we react. That is the paradox of the triggered tongue. Language becomes a survival tool instead of a bridge. The voice either rises to dominate, collapses into apology, sharpens into blame, or disappears into silence. What we say in those moments is not actually communication. It is nervous system discharge in the shape of words. This episode is not about managing anger or policing tone. It is about learning to recognize when language has stopped expressing us and has started defending us. It is about understanding that a dysregulated voice is not a personality flaw. It is a physiological state trying to protect itself. And until we learn to speak through the body rather than over it, we will keep apologizing for conversations we never consciously chose to have. We have all lived the aftermath, the text we wish we could retract, the argument that escalated too fast, the shutdown that left everything unresolved, the moment we said something that felt right in the fire and wrong in the ashes. Most communication breakdowns are not failures of vocabulary. They are failures of regulation. No amount of better words can compensate for a body in defense mode. In mirror talk terms, a trigger is not just something that happens to us. It is a moment when the nervous system says, I don't feel safe enough to stay in connection. That shift from safety to defense makes language do one of four things. 1. Attack to regain control. 2. Explain to manage threat through logic. 3. Appease to prevent abandonment. 4. Withdraw to preserve energy through distance. These are not character traits. They are state-dependent voices. This is why calm people often sound wiser, kinder, clearer, even if they are saying the same words. And why do people who are triggered often sound irrational, hostile, dramatic, or shut down, even if their point is valid? The nervous system shapes the delivery, and the delivery reshapes the meaning. A regulated conversation is two bodies in enough safety to stay curious. A triggered conversation is two bodies trying not to lose power. In this episode, we explore not how to stay calm all the time, that is impossible and inauthentic, but how to stay conscious enough in activation to avoid turning the other person into the enemy, and ourselves into the weapon. We will look at how the tongue becomes a shield, how silence becomes armor, how intellect becomes escape, and how urgency becomes a nervous system in freefall. We will break down why the body floods the voice before the mind catches up, how tone communicates threat even when words sound polite, why urgency feels like truth, even when it's just adrenaline, how the brain rewrites intention under stress, the difference between expressing emotion and projecting activation, and how to pause without abandoning what we feel. Every time we speak from a triggered state, we are not communicating a message. We are outsourcing a sensation. We are asking the other person's nervous system to hold what ours is unable to contain. This is why conflict often spreads faster than understanding, and why defensiveness is contagious. Physiology imitates physiology faster than thought, and yet the capacity to pause before projection is not about silence. It is about sovereignty, about remembering that not every sensation is a signal, and not every emotion needs an audience the moment it arrives, about learning to stay with the heat long enough for language to become choice instead of reflex. Before we enter element 1, take a moment to notice your own body right now, the jaw, the breath, the chest, the shoulders, not to change anything. Just to remember that every word you've ever regretted came from a body that didn't feel as safe as it needed to. Because the question at the core of this episode is simple. What does my voice sound like when I'm no longer speaking to be understood, but to feel safe? Thebiology beneath the reaction. Element 1, the neurobiology of a triggered voice, when language becomes a weaponized state. Why do we speak differently when the body feels unsafe? A triggered voice is not a bad attitude, a moral failure, or a mindset problem. It is a physiological broadcast. A nervous system in threat mode does not speak in the same language, tone, or rhythm as a regulated one, and the mistake most people make is assuming that communication begins in the mind. It doesn't. It begins in the body. Before a single word forms, the nervous system has already made a decision. Am I safe enough to think, or do I need to react? That decision determines everything that follows: tone, pacing, volume, phrasing, emotional charge, and even the degree of vocabulary available. The voice becomes a map of the body's state. A regulated state produces options: nuance, humor, curiosity, reflective delay, and the ability to integrate multiple perspectives at once. A dysregulated state produces urgency, interruption, generalization, accusation, contradiction, defensiveness, withdrawal, or emotional flooding. This is why someone can be intelligent, articulate, insightful, and self-aware until they are triggered. The nervous system hijacks the channel long before the intellect knows it has been pushed aside. The words may still sound like them, but the tone and pacing reveal the shift. The voice becomes a survival organ. Why does the voice change when the body enters threat? In a threat state, the brainstem and limbic system take priority. The higher reasoning centers, especially the prefrontal cortex, go temporarily offline to conserve energy for defense. The result is not only emotional intensity, but linguistic reduction. The vocabulary shrinks, the tone hardens or flattens, sentences are shortened or fragmented, speech becomes faster or sharper, or in some cases halts completely. Pronouns shift, I feel becomes you always, you never, people like you, etc. This is not random, it is neurological. The autonomic nervous system has only three main biological communication modes. 1. Ventral vagal, regulated seeking safety and connection, allows for reflective speech. 2. Sympathetic activation, fight-flight leads to mobilization, speaking fast, hot, and urgent speech. 3. Dorsal vagal shutdown, freeze collapse, leads to quiet, minimal engagement. Withdrawn speech, people assume triggers create emotion, but the trigger actually creates a state, and the state then produces the emotion, the perception, and finally the words. By the time a person is speaking sharply, accusingly, defensively, or with emotional force, the body has already declared a state of emergency. The speech is simply the broadcast. The biology of losing your words. This is why people report things like, I couldn't think straight, I didn't mean to say it like that, I shut down and couldn't get the words out. I replayed the situation later and then knew what I should have said. The nervous system controls language access. Under activation, the vagus nerve directs blood flow away from the prefrontal cortex and towards survival muscles, jaw, limbs, and diaphragm. This is also why tone becomes rigid. The larynx tightens and lungs shorten exhalation, producing a voice that sounds hostile, even when the person is trying not to be. It is not attitude, it is anatomy. The problem is that most interpersonal conflict takes place at the level of words, not at the level of the state. People try to correct speech without correcting the physiology producing the speech, then wonder why communication never improves. A triggered nervous system cannot choose a calm voice. It must be regulated into one. Why good communication skills fail under nervous system activation. People do not lose their communication abilities when triggered. They lose access to it. Someone can know reflective listening, conscious phrasing, ownership language, non-violent communication, conflict scripts, or even be trained in therapy and still become sharp, reactive, defensive, or emotionally dysregulated. Skills live in the cortex. Triggers live in the body. This is why people often say in therapy, I know how to handle it. I just can't do it in the moment. They're telling the truth. Their skill is not absent. It is inaccessible. When the threat response takes over, speech becomes a weapon, a shield, or a silence, depending on which survival strategy the body learned first. Fight voice leads to interrupting, correcting, moralizing, defending, and escalating. Flight voice leads to over-explaining, placating, rapid wording, and humor deflection. A fawn voice leads to apologizing, self-blame, and soothing the other to stay safe. Freeze voice reduces speech to minimal speech, flat tone, emotional shutdown, and no access to words. Almost no one is taught to recognize these patterns as physiological communication modes, which means most people they have a personality problem or a communication weakness when they actually have a nervous system strategy acting faster than the self can intervene. Why people speak to control instead of connect. When a person is flooded with activation, the body does not want understanding, it wants relief. If the only path to relief appears to be control, getting the other person to change, stop, agree, apologize, respond, the voice will shift into a coercive or pressurizing tone. This is why heated conversations often sound like courtroom arguments, threats, ultimatums, moral indictments, or guilt-binding statements. The nervous system is trying to force safety through dominance or submission. If the body does not trust that safety will be offered, it will attempt to demand it, which means the content of the speech is rarely the real issue. The state is. You cannot de-escalate a conflict by arguing with the content. You must regulate the state producing the content. Why silence can be just as dysregulated as shouting. People often divide triggered speech into aggressive and calm. But a quiet, frozen, flat voice can be just as dysregulated as a raised one. Silence is not always emotional maturity. Sometimes it is a dorsal collapse disguised as being polite, controlled, or not reacting. The shutdown state often produces one-word answers, numb tone, passive agreement, do what you want responses. Emotional absence. This is not consent, it is self-protection. Many people were raised to fear conflict so deeply that shutdown became the socially acceptable alternative to escalation. But the nervous system is still in threat. It has just gone inward instead of outward. In relationships, this creates emotional starvation. In workplaces, it creates burnout and resentment. In families, it creates children who grow into adults who cannot say, I'm not okay, until the body collapses. The four warning signs that the voice is no longer speaking for the self, but for the survival system. 1. Language becomes absolute or exaggerated. You never listen. You always do this. Everyone thinks so. 2. The goal shifts from understanding to control, winning, proving, forcing, shaming, and withdrawing. 3. The tone speeds up or flattens beyond intention, talking at instead of with, or shutting down completely. 4. The body is no longer listening, only reacting, interrupting, rehearsing responses, defending, eye hardening, and breath shortening. At that point, the conversation has already left the relational field and entered the survival field. You cannot fix a conversation that is now being run by threat physiology. You can only pause, regulate, and return. Anything else becomes two nervous systems arguing for safety. Why do people regret what they said, but repeat it anyway? Regret is a post-trigger phenomenon. Insight returns only after the body has downshifted. People often experience the post-activation crash. I didn't mean it like that. I don't know why I reacted so strongly. I wish I could have said it differently. But if the nervous system is never retrained, the same state will produce the same speech every time. Regret without regulation leads to repetition. This is why personal growth theories fail without somatic work. You cannot mind trick your way out of a survival response. There is no mind hack. It's maintaining the body and preserving oneself to safety. Reflection prompt: ask yourself, when I'm activated, do I change what I say, or does my entire voice change? If element 1 exposes what happens in the body when the voice becomes triggered, then element 2 explores what happens in the language itself. Because once the nervous system enters defense mode, speech often becomes projection, not communication. Instead of expressing what is happening inside, the words attempt to push the discomfort outward. Element 2, the linguistics of projection. When the voice becomes a shield instead of a bridge, when a person is activated, the first thing that changes is not their belief, but their language. The words may look like statements, accusations, logic, or moral certainty, but underneath the sentence structure is a physiological event. A threatened nervous system attempting to offload tension. Projection is not primarily a psychological flaw, it is a regulatory action. The body is too activated to hold its own internal state, so it tries to move that state outward onto whoever is closest. The tongue becomes the pressure valve. That is why projected speech almost always comes with one of three signatures. 1. Compression of complexity into absolutes. You always, you never, everyone knows, you made me feel. 2. External causality. The other person is positioned as the source of the emotional event. 3. Rushed, breathless pacing or rising pitch. The body signaling urgency and threat even while the content claims certainty. This is the paradox at the core of projected language. The more threatened the body feels, the more certain the words become. The language expands in confidence at the exact moment the nervous system is collapsing in safety. This is why arguments often feel irrational from the outside. They are not built to communicate, they are built to discharge. Language becomes a shield when the body feels unsafe. When the nervous system shifts into defensive activation, the brain begins reallocating cognitive resources. Reflex replaces reflection. Instead of curiosity, the system reaches for categorization. Instead of dialogue, it reaches for control. The person is not asking what is true, but how do I get this sensation out of me? So the sentence, "You're not listening to me," may feel like a description of the other person, but is often closer to, "My nervous system is overloaded and I need relief." This is what makes projection so difficult to recognize while it's happening. The language sounds outward facing, but it is actually inward protective. Why the nervous system chooses speech instead of silence. Silence requires regulation. Stillness requires safety. If someone has never developed the capacity to hold emotional activation inside their body without panic, they will speak to survive the moment, not in order to express anything meaningful. This is where the mirror linguistic hypothesis, MLH, becomes relevant. It proposes that in dysregulated states, language ceases to be a tool for clarity and becomes a mirror of internal state, regardless of intended meaning. The nervous system is always speaking. The words are only the surface layer. Likewise, nervous system language NSL reminds us that tone, pacing, cadence, and breath carry far more regulatory power than the literal content. Two sentences can contain identical words, but produce opposite physiological effects depending on delivery. That is why projected speech is not just emotionally sharp, it has a sound. The nervous system leaks through the voice. Why does projection feel morally justified to the speaker? Once the body is activated, the brain begins constructing meaning around the emotion to stabilize the experience. That is where the moral conviction comes from. The person feels threatened by internal tension, so the mind builds a narrative in which they are right, mistreated, or righteous. This is why debates between two triggered people escalate so quickly. Both bodies are searching for relief, while both minds are constructing arguments to defend the discharge. What looks like a disagreement is often two nervous systems fighting for enough oxygen to feel safe again. The moment projection becomes linguistic armor. Watch any heated conflict in a relationship, a political thread, an ideological clash, and a pattern appears. Speech speeds up, blame displaces vulnerability, questions turn into accusations, curiosity turns into certainty, identity takes priority over truth. This is the moment where the voice becomes armor. The goal of language is no longer connection, it is insulation. Words become the wall between what I feel and what I cannot bear to feel. And almost always, the sentence structure exposes the emotional layer beneath it. Linguistic form, you don't care about me. Internal state, it's hiding, I feel abandoned. Linguistic form, you're attacking me. Internal state, it's hiding, I feel unsafe. Linguistic form, you're making me angry. Internal state, it's hiding, I can't regulate what's happening inside me. Linguistic form, you need to calm down. Internal state, it's hiding, I'm overwhelmed and need control. The sentence points outward, the sensation is inward. Projection is the bridge between the two. The hidden purpose of a triggered tongue. The body is not trying to win, it is trying to offload activation. If the person cannot tolerate internal intensity, they will try to push it onto someone else through accusation, emotional escalation, moral superiority, urgent persuasion, or forced resolution. These are all forms of nervous system outsourcing. The tragedy is that projection always creates the very disconnection the person is trying to prevent. The body says, I'm scared, don't leave me. The words say, you're the problem. The result is, the other person pulls away, which reinforces, I knew I couldn't trust anyone. Projection is a self-fulfilling nervous system loop. If the first half of this element revealed what projection is, the second half explores how it speaks, and why triggered language is rarely about the person being spoken to, but about the unresolved emotional weight inside the speaker. Because when the nervous system is activated, language stops being relational and becomes directional, a weapon or a shield. The words may still sound like communication, but the intention beneath them has shifted from connection to containment. The body is no longer trying to be understood. It is trying to manage internal tension by outsourcing it. This is where the linguistics of projection fully emerge, the subtle but measurable shift from dialogue to discharge. The nervous system behind the sentence A regulated body uses language to share internal experience. A dysregulated body uses language to relieve internal experience. And that difference changes everything. When someone speaks from regulation, their words carry ownership. I feel overwhelmed and I need space. I'm scared this might repeat something from my past. I need time before I respond. But when someone speaks from activation, the ownership collapses. Emotional energy is pushed outward rather than processed inward, so language becomes blame-coded, accusatory, or exaggerated, because the body is trying to expel a feeling it doesn't know how to hold. It no longer sounds like, I'm upset about what happened. It turns into, you always do this. You're the reason I feel this way. If you cared, you wouldn't have. The words are not describing reality. They are discharging threat. And this is where the most important principle of this entire episode emerges. Triggered speech is not communication. It is regulation in disguise. Why projection speaks in absolutes. When the body feels unsafe, the brain loses linguistic nuance. It collapses into binary thinking because binaries create temporary certainty, and certainty feels like safety when the nervous system is in survival mode. That's why the activated mind defaults to always, never, everyone, no one, even if the person knows these statements aren't literally true. The body isn't trying to tell the truth. It is trying not to drown, so the sentence becomes a life raft. Which is why arguments so often sound like court cases instead of conversations. The nervous system is not searching for clarity, it is searching for control. Why you made me feel is not a feeling statement. One of the most common linguistic signs of projection is the phrase, you made me feel. It appears emotional, but it is actually a disguised accusation. It places responsibility outside the speaker and recruits the other person into the emotional activation. True emotional ownership sounds like, when that happened, I felt. I notice I'm reacting strongly. I need to understand why. Projection language sounds like, you're the reason I feel like this. You ruined my day. If you hadn't said that, I wouldn't be upset. The difference isn't semantic, it is neurological. Ownership brings emotion back into the body to be processed. Projection pushes emotion out of the body to be relieved. That is why projection creates conflict. It requires someone else to carry what the speaker cannot tolerate holding alone. The mirror linguistic hypothesis, MLH, in action. The nervous system doesn't just speak through words, it uses language to redistribute emotional load. In projection, speech becomes an emotional transfer system, known as transference, where the speaker attempts to hand their internal dysregulation to the listener, so they no longer have to feel it. The sentence may sound like a conversation, but the body underneath is saying, hold this for me, I can't hold it myself. Projection, therefore, isn't fundamentally about blame, it is about relief. But relief without ownership becomes relational contamination. The other person is forced into a role they didn't consent to, regulator, rescuer, defender, or enemy. NSL. The tone reveals the truth. The words conceal nervous system language. NSL teaches us that the tone reveals more than the sentence. A projected statement may use emotionally neutral vocabulary, but the pace, breath, volume, and muscle tension expose the intention beneath it. For example, I said I'm fine. If said with clipped breath, tightened jaw, and pulled back shoulders, the meaning is not I'm fine. The meaning is I'm defending myself, and you are now a threat. Projection is almost always delivered with faster speech, sympathetic activation, shorter breath cycle, fight-flight physiology, fixed eye contact or avoidance, survival scanning, forward or backward body lean, attack or retreat, contracted tone, vocal cords tighten under threat. The words say, I'm not angry. The body says, I'm at war. Why projection feels so convincing from the inside. One of the most painful truths about projection is this. The person doing it believes they are telling the truth because when the body is in survival physiology, perception narrows, the nervous system is no longer tracking relational context, only threat signals. The brain is not lying, it is protecting. So when someone says, you don't care about me, they are not describing you. They are describing the state of their nervous system. And this leads to one of the most transformative insights of this episode. Triggered language is not evidence of character. It is evidence of dysregulation. The person is not wrong. They are overwhelmed. They are not cruel. They are activated. They are not rejecting you. They are trying to survive their own emotion. Which brings us to the final reflective question of this element. If I paused before reacting, whose pain would I actually be speaking from? If element 2 showed us how projection leaks through language, Element 3 goes deeper into why it happens, revealing that most triggered speech is not rooted in the present at all, but in the past. Because when we are activated, we are rarely arguing with the person in front of us. We are answering an old wound that finally found a mouth. Element 3, trauma echoes in real-time speech. Why most arguments are emotional flashbacks, not present moment exchanges, when the body answers a ghost instead of a person. There is a moment, subtle but universal, where a conversation stops being about what is happening and begins being driven by something older, deeper, and much less visible. The voice changes, the breath becomes shorter, the body leans forward or pulls away, logic collapses, vocabulary shrinks, the present dissolves, and the nervous system begins speaking from memory rather than from reality. That is the moment the trauma echo arrives. Most people assume arguments are about the content of the disagreement, the words said, the topic, the trigger. But in nervous system terms, almost no conflict is actually about the surface situation. The body is not reacting to what is happening now. It is reacting to what the moment reminds it of. This is the core truth of triggered communication. In dysregulation, we don't react to people. We react to the past they accidentally activate. Someone raises their voice, and the body doesn't hear this person. It hears the history of voices that meant danger. Someone rolls their eyes, and the body doesn't register sarcasm. It registers humiliation. Someone goes quiet, and the body doesn't perceive calm. It perceives abandonment. The nervous system doesn't ask, is this person safe? It asks, what does this feel like from my past? And if the answer is a familiar threat, the body responds as if the old danger has returned, even when the present situation is entirely different. The emotional flashback in communication psychologist Pete Walker coined the term emotional flashback, a trauma response in which the body relives the feeling of an experience without necessarily remembering the event itself. Unlike visual flashbacks, emotional flashbacks have no images, only intensity, urgency, and overwhelm. They sound like, I know I'm overreacting, but I can't stop. I feel like I'm 12 again. I don't know why I'm so angry, I just am. I'm suddenly terrified, and I don't know why. But in conversation, emotional flashbacks don't introduce themselves. They leak through language. A person who felt ignored in childhood won't say, I'm scared this silence reminds me of emotional neglect. They'll say, you don't care about me. You never have. A person who was punished for mistakes won't say, when you criticize me, my nervous system treats it like danger. They'll say, I can never do anything right with you, can I? A person who was trained to fawn won't say, I panic when people are upset with me. They'll say, I'm sorry, it's fine, forget it, I'll fix it, just don't be mad. The echo hides inside the sentence, which leads to the realization most people never make. The argument is coming from a younger version of the nervous system, not the adult self. The age regression of the activated brain. When the amygdala threat center hijacks the prefrontal cortex, reasoning center, the brain regresses into emotional time travel. The person may be 35 in a conversation, but speaking from the emotional reality of 7, 14, or 19. You can hear the shift when someone says, you always, you never, nobody ever listens to me. Why does this always happen to me? That isn't adult language, it's child logic, resurfacing in a grown body. Because trauma is not stored as a story, it is stored as a state. And when the state returns, so does the voice that was never heard. Why arguments accelerate instead of resolve. Two dysregulated nervous systems don't communicate. They mirror threat. When one person is speaking from an emotional flashback, and the other responds logically, defensively, or with equal activation, the conflict escalates, not because the topic demands it, but because one person is fighting the past, the other person is fighting the present. Neither person is speaking to each other. This is why so many people feel after an argument, I don't even know what we were really fighting about. Because the fight wasn't about the dishes, or the tone, or the wording. It was about unprocessed pain trying to find a witness. And if neither person recognizes the trauma echo, the conversation becomes a battle of nervous systems, not a dialogue between humans. The nervous system sequence of a triggered exchange, most spoken conflict follows this physiological chain. 1. Cue. Something in the present anchors to past danger, tone, silence, rejection, pressure, etc. 2. Body activation, heart rate rises, breath shortens, muscles tense, voice changes. 3. Emotional time shift. The body retrieves stored survival patterns, fight, flight, fawn, freeze. 4. Projected speech words convert internal discomfort into external accusation, defense, or urgency. 5. Counteractivation. The other person's body senses danger and mirrors dysregulation. 6. Narrative distortion. Each person now argues not with reality, but with their threat-filtered version of reality. 7. Aftermath, shame, regret, exhaustion, confusion, emotional hangover. This is why post-argument reflection often sounds like, why did I say that? I didn't mean any of that. I don't even recognize myself when I get like that. It felt like something took over. Something did take over, the survival of self, because the body will always prioritize safety over accuracy, connection over truth, defense over clarity. That is not a personal flaw, it is a physiological reality. The question that breaks the trauma loop. The most illuminating reflection in this entire element is the one that most people never ask in conflict. Who am I actually fighting right now? When someone is triggered, the target of the reaction is rarely the person in front of them. It is the unmetabolized history behind them. It might be the parent who didn't listen, the partner who betrayed trust, the teacher who humiliated, the caregiver who punished emotion, the friend who abandoned, the authority who controlled. But the body does not differentiate time when in threat. Every unhealed wound becomes present tense. So the enemy in real-time speech is almost always a ghost wearing a modern face, which is why regulation, not logic, is the only thing that can interrupt the cycle. When someone says, "I didn't mean to say that, I was just triggered," what they are really describing is not a lapse in emotional intelligence, but a moment in which the body overrode the mind. Triggered speech is not communication. It is protection disguised as language. The nervous system is not trying to express truth. It is trying to survive a threat. And because the body cannot use teeth or fists the way it once did in childhood, it uses tone, accusation, withdrawal, sarcasm, silence, intellectual dominance, defensiveness, emotional collapse, or rage instead. The argument is just the socially acceptable version of a fight or flight response. The body speaks in whatever form it believes will stop the threat the fastest. The four survival voices. When the nervous system becomes activated, it does not choose language based on clarity, fairness, or emotional maturity. It defaults to whatever survival mode the body learned earliest and most often. Every dysregulated communication pattern can be traced back to one of the four primary nervous system defense states. 1. Fight, the voice of attack. This shows up as raised volume, sharp tone, blame, accusation, or verbal domination. The person is not trying to communicate. They are trying to regain a sense of power by pushing the threat away. Speech will sound like, "You're the problem. You always do this. I'm done with you," or "You never listen." The goal is self-protection through force. If I strike first, I cannot be hurt. 2. Flight, the voice of escape and avoidance. Rather than confront, this person tries to outrun the emotional intensity. They intellectualize, minimize, redirect the topic, or physically remove themselves from the conversation. It sounds like, "Let's not do this. You're overreacting. This isn't a big deal," or "I don't want to talk about it." The body is saying, "If I can get away from the discomfort, I won't have to feel it." 3. Freeze, the voice of shutdown. When neither fight nor flight feels possible, the system collapses into numbness, disconnection, or wordlessness. The person may go silent, speak in monotone, say, "Forget it. It doesn't matter, do what you want," or simply stare without responding. It looks like apathy, but it is the biology of overwhelm. If I go still, the danger might pass. 4. Fawn, the voice of appeasement. Here, the person tries to neutralize the threat by pleasing or over-accommodating. They apologize excessively, take responsibility for things they didn't do, or say whatever will calm the other person down. It sounds like, "I'm sorry, you're right. I'll fix it. It's okay, I don't mind," or "Just tell me what you need." This is not kindness. It is self-erasure for the sake of temporary safety. All four voices have different tones, but the same purpose, to stop the body from feeling unsafe. None of them is about truth, resolution, or connection. They are about regulating internal threat by externalizing it through force, distance, collapse, or compliance. And this is the critical point. The person is not reacting to the conversation. They are reacting to the body state the conversation has activated. Once this is understood, triggered speech stops being confusing or personal. It becomes recognizable as a nervous system trying to survive with the only tools it has ever known. The person is not defending themselves against the present. They are defending themselves against the return of a past threat that the body has not yet learned how to separate from now. The body remembers what the mind explains away. One of the great myths of emotional maturity is that understanding your triggers will stop you from reacting. But cognitive insight does not override physiological imprinting. You can know you're safe, and your body can still behave as if you're not. This is why people say things like, "I know you're not my father, but I can't stop feeling like I'm being scolded. I know you're not abandoning me, but it feels like you are. I know you didn't mean it like that, but my body reacted anyway." The mind deals in explanation. The nervous system deals in pattern recognition. And when those two disagree, the nervous system wins every time. The real reason people say things they don't mean, they do mean them, but not in the way they think. They mean them from the part of the self that's never felt enough to say, "I feel small. I feel unprotected. I feel like I'm not allowed to matter. I'm scared you're going to leave. I'm terrified of being rejected. I don't know how to ask for reassurance. I'm activated, and I don't know why." Because the younger self does not have access to adult articulation. It speaks in emotional code instead. "You don't care about me. You always do this. I'm done. Forget it. Whatever." Every harsh sentence is a disguised request for safety. Every defensive tone is a shield against shame. Every projection is a displaced fear. Behind the angry sentence is the unspoken one. "I don't know how to hold this pain by myself." The nervous system trick, when silence feels like abandonment and comfort feels like control-triggered speech, is not random. It is patterned around whatever the body feared most in early attachment. If the worst thing was being ignored, the trigger will be silence. If the worst thing was being criticized, the trigger will be feedback. If the worst thing was being controlled, the trigger will be advice. If the worst thing was being left, the trigger would be distance. We don't get activated by the thing itself. We get activated by what the body learned that thing meant. So silence is never just silence. Distance is never just space. Tone is never just tone. Feedback is never just language. The body fills in meaning, not fact. And once the meaning is assigned, the fight is not about what is happening. It is about protecting against what feels like it is happening. How projection functions as a nervous system shortcut projection is not a moral failure. It is a survival strategy of the overwhelmed body. It works like this. 1. Unbearable emotion rises inside the system. 2. The body cannot hold it without dysregulating. 3. The nervous system exports the emotional charge onto another person. 4. The brain rewrites the narrative so the discomfort appears external, not internal. That's why projection feels so convincing. The body is not trying to be right, it is trying not to collapse. If the system can make the other person responsible, then the inner tension can temporarily exit the self, which is why arguments feel relieving in the moment and deeply shameful after the flood has passed. The body was never speaking truth, it was evacuating intensity. The real question under every triggered exchange, not, why are you talking to me like this? Not, why are you so sensitive? Not, why can't you just calm down? But, what pain is this person protecting? What threat does their body think just arrived? What younger version of them is speaking through this moment? If that question is asked before responding, the entire conversation changes. If it is not asked, the trauma echo continues and the past wins again. Element 4. Psychological insight. The cost of speaking while unregulated. When a person speaks from dysregulation, what leaves their mouth is not communication, it is compensation. The words are not chosen, they are discharged. They are not shaped by thought, they are shaped by threat. This is why so many people, after a heated exchange, report the same sequence with eerie consistency. A surge, a release, a crash, and then the familiar, private aftermath, regret, self-judgment, and emotional hangover. If element 3 revealed that most triggered speech is an echo of past danger, then element 4 asks the next, harder question. What does it cost us when we keep speaking from that place, not once, but habitually, relationally, socially, and even publicly? Because the real injury of dysregulated communication is not simply that we say things we don't mean. The deeper wound is that every time the body speaks instead of the self, we fracture trust with others and with ourselves. We create a gap between intention and expression, and that gap slowly becomes an identity. I didn't mean it. I don't know why I said that. Why do I always do this? At that point, the damage is no longer just interpersonal. It becomes internal, a collapse of narrative coherence. The person stops trusting their own voice. The nervous system as narrator speech is often mistaken for a purely cognitive act, something that happens only in the mind and exists through the mouth. But the nervous system is always speaking first. Tone, rhythm, pacing, breathing, speed of reaction, volume, facial muscle tension, these are not add-ons to language. They are the carrier signal that tells the listener what the words actually mean. A sentence delivered from a regulated state lands as communication. The same sentence delivered from a sympathetic spike, fight, lands as an attack. The same sentence delivered from dorsal collapse, freeze, lands as withdrawal, shutdown, or passive hostility. This is why dysregulated speech is rarely heard as we intend it. It is not the content that breaks the connection. It is the state behind it. When the body hijacks the mouth, every nervous system has a threshold, a point where the survival brain takes over and the social brain shuts down. That moment, often measured in heartbeats, is the line where speech ceases to be relational and becomes reactive. Psychologists call it emotional flooding. Trauma theorists call it state hijack. Polyvagal theory calls it loss of ventral vagal access. In lived experience, people just call it, I snapped. What makes this moment so psychologically expensive is not the outburst itself, but what follows. The apology that feels insincere because the body isn't calm yet. The shame spike, I've done it again. The withdrawal to avoid accountability. The relational tension that lingers long after the argument ends. This is the regret loop. Activation, discharge, shame, shutdown, silence, self-resentment. The loop is not a character flaw, it is a physiological sequence. But unless a person becomes aware of that sequence, they begin to believe something corrosive. Maybe this is just who I am. When speech damages the self, most people assume that the danger of dysregulated speech is what it does to the other person. What's less discussed is what it does to the speaker. It erodes self-trust. I can't rely on myself when I'm emotional. It fractures identity coherence. I'm calm with strangers, but explode with people I care about. It builds internal self-surveillance. I have to monitor every word I say. It fuels shame-avoidant behavior. I'll just say nothing next time. Silence is safer. Over time, this leads to a split between the felt self and the spoken self. People begin to speak strategically instead of authentically, choosing words that protect against shame, not words that reflect truth. In MLH terms, this is the erosion of semantic integrity, the alignment between sensation, meaning, and expression. The tragedy is that this silence doesn't improve relationships. It starves them. The collapse after the storm. Most people imagine the consequence of dysregulated speech as the argument itself, the yelling, the defensiveness, the hostility. But the real cost is what happens after the argument, the distance that settles in the room, the emotional recoil, in the other person the self-consciousness that replaces natural interaction, the unspoken fear. When will it happen again? Couples report days of reduced eye contact, guarded tone, and nervous system hypervigilance. Parents report children becoming obedient but anxious. Friends report laughter becoming forced, politeness replacing ease. In every case, the relationship becomes regulation unsafe, not because love has disappeared, but because unpredictability has entered the space. A nervous system that does not feel safe cannot attach honestly. It can comply, it can avoid, it can adapt, but it cannot trust. Why venting is not regulation, a modern myth circulates widely. Just say it. Let it out. Express everything. Don't hold back. But venting is not release, it is a broadcast fight-flight. It offloads activation instead of metabolizing it. Venting may feel relieving to the speaker, but it elevates arousal in the listener. It transfers tension instead of dissolving it. That is not regulation, it is redistribution. True nervous system regulation doesn't happen through another person. It happens before you speak to them. This is why NSL frames speech as the final stage of regulation, not the first. If breath is fast, tone is sharp, pace is compressed, the body is still speaking in threat frequency, no matter how reasonable the words sound. The collapse of narrative integrity. One of the most damaging long-term effects of speaking while dysregulated is what it does to a person's story of themselves. Once someone repeatedly says things they don't mean, they begin to doubt the authenticity of their own emotions. Self-reflection becomes polluted by post-event scrambling. Did I really believe that, or was I just triggered? Was that anger justified, or was it old trauma? Do I actually feel this way, or was I just trying to protect myself? Eventually, a person can lose the thread of their own emotional coherence. Truth feels unstable, not because the person is confused, but because their state keeps distorting their speech. In clinical language, this is known as affect-driven cognition collapse. In everyday language, it feels like, I can't trust my own reactions anymore. When silence replaces speech, once dysregulated speech creates enough relational damage, many people attempt the opposite extreme emotional minimalism. They stop expressing needs, they stop sharing anger, they stop disagreeing. They speak carefully, strategically, politely, but never fully. This looks mature from the outside, but inwardly, it is just a different kind of shutdown, a dorsal linguistic collapse. Instead of fight, the nervous system chooses freeze in sentences. Instead of yelling, the person becomes vague, quiet, or chronically accommodating. They trade tension for invisibility. The cost is identical. Connection without authenticity is not a connection. It is performance. If dysregulated speech were only a momentary loss of composure, the consequences would be small. But unregulated language doesn't just leave the mouth, it leaves residue. Words spoken in survival mode do not behave like normal communication. They behave like emotional carriers, embedding themselves into memory, shaping identity, and silently rewriting the psychological contract inside a relationship. This is why so many people can say, I didn't mean it, yet the impact remains. In a regulated conversation, words function as information. In a dysregulated one, they function as weapons, shields, or escape routes. Even when the content is forgotten, the felt sense of the encounter lingers in the nervous system. I don't feel safe with you anymore. I don't know who I am around you. Something in me shuts down when you get like that. These are not intellectual responses. They are somatic verdicts. When speech becomes a survival strategy, the nervous system does not wait for conscious thought before generating language. It speaks through us. When dysregulated, this is why so many activated statements begin with exaggeration, accusation, or globalized language. You never listen. Everyone always leaves. I can't trust anyone. These statements are not factual assessments. They are encoded distress signals, compressed and projected outward. The speaker is not actually arguing with the other person. They are arguing with every unresolved moment that came before them. The body is not reacting to the present, it is reacting to the archive. And yet, the tragedy is this. The moment the words leave the mouth, the body calms slightly. Not because truth has been expressed, but because tension has been discharged. This means the speaker experiences relief, while the listener absorbs the cost. This is the double bind of dysregulated speech. The speaker feels temporary relief, and the listener receives long-term distrust. The speaker, I finally said it. The listener receives, I don't feel safe anymore. The speaker, emotional venting, and the listener receives emotional contamination. The speaker feels release. The listener is left with residue. In trauma-informed psychology, this is known as externalized regulation, an unconscious attempt to force another nervous system to hold the distress that the speaker cannot metabolize internally. This is why venting is not the same as healing. It transfers activation. It does not resolve it. The rupture regret cycle. Most people don't realize how predictable the cycle of dysregulated speech is. It almost always follows the same arc. 1. Activation leads to the body going into defense, breath shortens, and language sharpens. 2. Verbal discharge leads to words becoming blunt, absolute, or weaponized. 3. Temporary relief leads to the speaker feeling lighter, justified, and honest. 4. Post-regulation clarity leads to shame, guilt, self-disgust, and dissociation. 5. Withdrawal leads to silence, avoidance, minimization, and self-protection. 6. Relationship distance increases. The very fear that triggered the speech becomes reinforced. This is the paradox. The moment meant to regain connection actually deepens the wound of disconnection. The speaker did not want to destroy trust. They were trying to feel safe enough to stay present. But because their nervous system could not tolerate the internal load, the relationship became the container for it, and therefore the casualty of it. This is why unregulated speech doesn't simply hurt feelings. It alters the bond, sometimes permanently. The memory of tone, one of the most under-discussed realities in communication research, is this. The nervous system remembers tone long after it forgets content. A single sentence spoken in a threatening tone can override months of safety building. A hierarchy of retention in emotional conflict is always 1. Tone felt sense. 2. Facial expression posture. 3. Words used meaning. Even if the apology is sincere, if the tone of the original rupture felt unsafe, the body will not accept the apology as evidence of change, because relationships are not stored in the prefrontal cortex, but in the interoceptive map of the body. This is why people say, I know you apologized, but something still doesn't feel right. I'm not angry anymore, but I can't relax around you. It's like my body won't let me trust you again. What they're describing is not stubbornness. It's implicit memory protecting the organism. The identity cost of repeated dysregulation, unregulated speech doesn't just change how others see us, it changes how we see ourselves. Most people who speak from activation later experience one of three identity fractures. 1. I'm the problem collapse, leading to shame, self-loathing, and withdrawal. 2. They deserved it armor, leading to rationalization and emotional hardening. 3. I can't trust myself when I'm upset, leads to fragmentation, hyper-control, and suppression. All three are forms of self-abandonment. None resolves the original wound. The deeper cost is internal. The person begins to fear their own voice. Not the volume of it, the truth inside it. And from that point forward, language becomes something to manage rather than inhabit. Expression becomes strategic. Honesty becomes dangerous. Presence becomes performance. This is not communication. It is living in exile inside one's own mouth. Relationship damage as physiological data. In polyvagal terms, the moment a person is spoken to in threat tone, their system automatically shifts out of ventral vagal safety and into mobilization or collapse. This means the relational field has already changed before meaning is assigned. So the real question in conflict is never, how do we understand each other? But rather, can our nervous systems remain connected long enough for understanding to even be possible? Once the body no longer feels safe, the words no longer matter. There is no empathy without safety. There is no repair without regulation. That brings us to the pivot point, the one skill that changes everything, yet almost no one is taught. Not speaking better, but pausing before speaking at all. If dysregulated speech fractures trust and silences authenticity, then regulated speech must be something more than staying calm. It requires a nervous system that can pause, reorient, and return to relational integrity before words are spoken. Element 5 now shifts from psychological insight to applied practice. How to interrupt projection before it becomes speech, how to regulate tone before meaning is distorted, how to use NSL to lower activation in both nervous systems, how to speak from truth instead of discharge, how to protect the relationship without self-abandonment or silence. Because communication is not fixed by better wording, it is fixed by better physiological timing. Element 5, integration practice, the pause that protects the relationship. If the first 4 elements revealed why triggered speech erupts and how it hijacks connection, element 5 turns fully toward practice, not theory, not analysis, but the moment-to-moment mechanics of shifting from reaction to regulation while we are still inside the emotional field. Because it is never the moment after the argument that costs us the most. It is the 5 seconds before the words leave the mouth, the space where either the nervous system speaks for us or we speak from ourselves. That gap, small, invisible, and easily ignored, is the difference between a conversation that deepens trust, a reaction that bruises the bond, a truth spoken cleanly, a truth weaponized as defense, a repairable rupture, a rupture that becomes a memory of threat. In every episode so far, one principle keeps reappearing, quietly but consistently. The body speaks first. The mind justifies later, which means regulation is not a concept. It is timing, breath, tone, muscle tension, and the speed at which words are allowed to form. And this is what most communication models miss. You cannot think your way into better speech while dysregulated because cognition is already subordinated to survival. The pause isn't polite, it's physiological. Why the pause matters more than the content. When the body is in fight, speech sharpens, accelerates, narrows. When the body is in flight, words scatter, rush, or become overly agreeable. When the body is in freeze, language collapses into silence, shutdown, or numb compliance. When the body is in fawn, speech bends into self-betrayal disguised as kindness. In all 4 states, language is no longer communication, it is protection, which means trying to speak rationally while dysregulated is like trying to perform heart surgery while falling down a stairwell. The procedure is possible, but the conditions guarantee damage. That is why the pause is not the absence of communication. It is the precondition for communication. Regulation before expression is taking responsibility. Expression before regulation is projection. This is the nervous system truth behind the phrase. If my breath is fast, my truth isn't ready. Not because the truth is invalid, but because the delivery system is contaminated by threat physiology. The 2 kinds of pausing. There are only 2 types of pause in a heated moment. 1. Reactive pausing, done from shutdown, withdrawal, or avoidance, feels like disconnecting from the other person and the self, produces fear in the other. Are you abandoning me? Feels cold, distant, or punishing, ends in silent resentment, not repair. This is not the pause we are cultivating. 2. Regulating pausing, signals presence, not escape, slows the body so the words don't become weapons, maintains connection. I'm still here, I just need a second to speak well, protects the relationship and the speaker at the same time. Ends in clarity, not collapse. A regulating pause is not a retreat, it is a reset. It does not delay communication. It makes authentic communication possible. What happens in the brain during a regulating pause? Neuroscience and polyvagal research converge here. The pause reduces limbic hijack, amygdala dominance. Blood flow returns to the prefrontal cortex, reasoning, empathy, time awareness. Tone and prosody reopen. The body stops signaling threat. Mirror neurons shift, and the other person feels the de-escalation. The right words become available because the brain is no longer in defense mode. This is why people always say things like, I didn't mean it. I don't know why I said that. I was just so angry after the moment has passed. They're not lying. They were speaking from the wrong state. The pause is what allows the state and the self to realign before speaking. The three-stage reset. How the pause works in real time. There is a practical sequence, simple enough to be applied mid-argument, mid-text exchange, mid-trigger. Pause leads to anchor and to be able to name, which allows the individual to choose one. Pause the impulse. Stop the sentence before it forms. Do not exhale the reaction as language. The goal is not silence, but interception. 2. Anchor the body. Drop shoulders, unclench jaw, deepen exhale. Look at one stationary object. Take one deliberate breath through the nose. This interrupts state escalation within 5 to 12 seconds. 3. Name the state, internally or aloud. I'm getting activated. My chest is tight. I need a second. I want to speak, but not from this place. Naming re-engages the observing self, not the reacting self. 4. Choose the next move. Speak slower, ask for a minute, shift posture, or say nothing until the body agrees to speak. This is not emotional avoidance. This is emotional precision. Why people fear the pause, and how to undo that fear. Many people associate pausing with abandonment, being dismissed, being punished with silence, losing the argument, losing control, and being unsafe while waiting. So the nervous system treats pausing as a threat, not a tool, which means the pause must be signaled, not just done. Example, negative language, whatever, forget it. Positive language, I want to keep talking, but I need a breath first so I don't say something I regret. Negative, goes quiet, stares away, and shuts down. Positive response, I'm getting overwhelmed. Can we slow this down so I can stay present? The difference is monumental. One abandons the connection. One protects the connection. This is the foundation of NSL pause language. I'm still here, I just need a moment so I don't speak from the wrong state. That single sentence has saved marriages, friendships, and self-respect. Why this works in text and digital conflict: 2 screens remove tone, breath, and presence, which means they speed up escalation. The pause is even more important online, because typing while triggered equals a written permanence of a temporary state. Fast replies create false urgency. Delayed replies without context create insecurities. Tone is inferred, not heard. So a regulating pause sounds like, I care about this conversation, I just need time to answer well. Or I'm heated, I want to respond, not react, I'll come back in a bit. This keeps the thread intact without violence. In the first part of this element, we established why the pause is not a technique, but a physiological prerequisite for truth-based communication. In the next part, we focus on how to train it, how to use it in real interpersonal conflict, and how to maintain self-respect while protecting the bond. Because the real fracture in most relationships doesn't happen when people disagree. It happens when one or both people speak from a state they later cannot defend without shame. Every regret story sounds the same. I didn't mean it that way. I don't know why I said that. I was just angry. I shouldn't have spoken while I was that upset, which means regret is not moral failure. It is a post-regulation mind reviewing pre-regulation speech. And the pause is the only tool that gives the nervous system a chance to catch up with the soul before the mouth gets involved. The 5-second pause, the fast reset for live conflict. This is the micro-pause designed for heated, real-time confrontation, where walking away would escalate the situation. The sequence is, drop leading to exhale and ground, enabling the possibility to re-enter. 1. Drop the shoulders by 1 centimeter. The body signals not attacking. This alone can lower the other person's threat reading. 2. Exhale longer than the inhale. Even a 2-second longer exhale triggers a parasympathetic shift. You don't need a full breathwork session. Just one conscious exhale resets the vocal tone. 3. Ground with one tactile anchor. Thumb on finger pad, fingertips on thigh, foot pressure into the floor. This interrupts dissociation and keeps you in the body, not in the argument. 4. Re-enter with ownership language. I want to speak clearly. Give me a second to get there. Not defensive, not hostile, not abandoning, responsible. The whole thing takes 5 to 7 seconds. But it changes the next 5 minutes of communication. And that is the point. Most relationships don't fall apart over big betrayals. They fall apart over thousands of unchecked micro-ruptures. The pause prevents the rupture from becoming its own wound. The 30-second pause, when you need to step back without abandoning. This is the pause for when speech has already lost coherence, tone has escalated, and anything said now will become evidence later. The common fear, if I step back now, they'll think I don't care, I'm weak, or I'm giving up. Which is why the pause must be signaled, not implied. Example, I'm getting overwhelmed, I don't want to keep speaking from this state. Let me take 30 seconds so I can stay connected instead of reacting. Notice the nervous system signals embedded in this phrasing. I'm getting overwhelmed equals ownership of state, not blame. I don't want to keep speaking from this place signals responsibility. Let me take 30 seconds gives a time frame, reduces abandonment fear, so I can stay connected, affirms the relationship as priority. This is not emotional withdrawal. It is a regulated interruption, a skill most adults were never taught, because nobody teaches. You're allowed to pause for the sake of the other person. The 2-minute pause, the deep reset for high-charge conflict. This is the pause used when the body is already in sympathetic dominance, fight-flight, or dorsal collapse, shutdown, numbness. It is not a disappearance, it is a recovery window. A formula. 1. Move the body, change position, stand, walk, stretch. Movement discharges adrenaline. 2. Slow breath exhale, or humming, which stimulates the vagus nerve through sound vibration. 3. Name the state internally. This is activation, not truth. 4. Decide. Speak, postpone, or change medium, voice to text. The key is the distinction between space and distance. Distance is abandonment. Space is capacity building. The two feel completely different in the nervous system of the person on the other side. So the verbal marker must be clear. I'm stepping away so I can come back grounded. I'm not leaving the conversation. I'm protecting it. There is no manipulation in that. It is an act of relational integrity. Regulated speech versus triggered speech. When we compare regulated speech with triggered speech, the difference is not just in the words used, but in the nervous system state that produces them. Triggered speech tends to be fast, compressed, and defensive. The body is speaking from threat, not choice. The tone sharpens, the breath shortens, and language becomes absolute. You never listen. You're making this worse. I can't deal with this. The goal of the sentence is not communication, but relief, to discharge internal tension outward. There is urgency, blame, and a felt need to win space, not share it. Regulated speech, by contrast, is slower and more spacious. The person is not speaking from the activation, but about it. Instead of accusation, there is ownership. I'm getting overwhelmed and need a second. Or I want to stay with this, but I need to slow down to do it well. The breath remains available, the tone stays human, and the words leave room for response rather than cornering the other person. Regulated speech makes a connection possible because it doesn't force the listener into defense. A triggered voice says, "You're the problem." A regulated voice says, "Here's what's happening in me." A triggered voice tries to control the other person so the speaker can feel safe. A regulated voice works to stabilize itself so the conversation can remain safe for both. Triggered speech collapses into binaries, always never, right, wrong, victim, perpetrator, because the nervous system thinks in survival categories when threatened. Regulated speech returns to nuance. I feel, I need, I'm noticing, because safety allows complexity. Triggered speech escalates. Regulated speech slows the room. This contrast is not about personality, morality, or intelligence. It is about state. The same person can speak from either voice, depending on whether their system is in fight-flight or grounded engagement. The shift from triggered to regulated does not begin with a better script, but with a better breath. Once the body downshifts, the mind can access language that reflects choice instead of reaction. The essential difference is this. Triggered speech protects the self at the cost of the relationship. Regulated speech protects the relationship without abandoning the self. Every regulated version has 3 traits. Ownership language. I feel, I need, I'm noticing. Nervous system pacing, slower, softer, more deliberate. Bridge statements. Can we slow down? Let me come back steady. That is not nice communication. That is state-aware communication, a completely different skill set than being good at expressing emotions. And this is the central reframe. The goal is not to be calm all the time. The goal is to speak from the self, not from the state. How the pause changes conflict in 5 emotional states. Grief. Triggered speech. You don't understand what this feels like. Just leave me alone. Regulated speech. I don't know how to talk right now. I need quiet, but I still need you near. Rage. Triggered speech. You're the problem. You don't get it. Regulated speech. I need to move this anger through my body before I speak so I don't aim it at you. Shame. Triggered speech. Whatever. It doesn't matter. I'm fine. Regulated speech. I'm shutting down because I feel exposed. I want to stay here, but I need a minute. Panic. Triggered speech. I can't do this. Stop talking. Regulated speech. My chest is tight. I need to breathe before I can hear anything. Confusion. Triggered speech. Just tell me what you want. Regulated speech. I'm overwhelmed. Can we slow it down so I can actually take it in? In every state, the pause changes the emotional physics of the moment. Because regulated presence is not neutrality, it is containment. The mirror talk drill. Training the pause into the body. This is a practice, not a concept. 1. Stand in front of a mirror. 2. Speak a sentence that usually comes from activation. I'm sick of this. You never listen, etc. 3. Pause halfway through the sentence. 4. Notice breath, posture, jaw, speed. 5. Re-speak the same sentence after one deliberate exhale. 6. Compare tone, not words. You will feel the difference in your throat, chest, and face before the listener does. That is the body-mind learning what regulated voice sounds like. Reflection prompt. Ask yourself, what does my regulated voice sound like? And who in my life has never heard it? The point is not guilt, it is awareness. Because the first step towards speaking from regulation is realizing how long we've been speaking without it. We've built the pause into a living skill, not silence as avoidance, but a brief reset that protects both the truth and the relationship. The final move is what happens after the pause, reclaiming a voice you trust, repairing without self-erasure, and letting the words you choose return you to yourself. That is the work of our closing integration. Element 6, closing integration. The words that return you to yourself. When the surge has passed and the body begins to settle, there is a second danger that often goes unnoticed, the shame after the storm. Many people can regulate well enough to stop the worst of their reactivity, but then punish themselves in private, collapsing into self-criticism or over-apology that erodes their dignity. Closing integration is where you refuse to abandon yourself after you've done the hard work of not abandoning the other person. This is not performance. It is a form of internal leadership, reclaiming the post-trigger voice. Dignity, ownership, repair. A post-trigger voice does 3 things in sequence. It acknowledges impact, it owns state, and it recommits to connection. It does not litigate the past or seek a perfect narrative. It marks a turning point. I got activated and I don't like how that felt in me or landed for you. I want to try again, slower. This is dignity without defensiveness. Ownership is explicit but not self-shaming. I shut down because I felt overwhelmed. Repair is practical rather than theatrical. Can we take this in small steps? Here's what I heard. Here's what matters to me. What matters to you? Each line restores coherence in the body and the relationship. Your tone does more work than the words. The words simply confirm what the body has already decided. We are not at war. The paradox: pausing is not weakness, it's self-authority. One of the deepest myths to dissolve is that pausing means losing ground. In reality, the pause is the assertion of authorship. It is the refusal to let an old survival reflex dictate today's meaning. People who mistake speed for strength escalate, then explain. People who practice authority of pace regulate, then speak. The result is paradoxical: less drama, more impact. Trust rises because the other person learns your words have a governor, not censorship, but conscience. You become predictable in the best way, not scripted, but safe. Initiating repair without self-erasure. There are two common detours in repair: apologizing as appeasement and explaining as escape. The first sacrifices self-respect. The second sacrifices the relationship. Repair without self-erasure sounds like, I'm sorry for the pressure my tone created. I still want to communicate my concern, but not like that. Or, I see how my speed made it hard to stay with me. I'm going to slow down. I also need time to finish my thought. Notice the dual movement. You validate their experience while also protecting your integrity. This is a boundary and a bridge at once. In practice, keep three anchors: a pace you can breathe with, words you can stand by tomorrow, and a purpose that is larger than being right, understanding. If any of those slip, pause again. You are allowed to call your own timeouts in service of a cleaner outcome. The affirmation that closes the loop: write it, say it, own it. My mouth does not owe my panic a microphone. This is not self-denial, it is self-governance. Panic can have a place in the room, acknowledged, witnessed, breathed with, but it does not get to chair the meeting. When that sentence becomes reflex, your nervous system learns a new hierarchy. Truth first, physiology steady, speech aligned. Repair ritual. If you want a minimal ritual that can be used after any heated moment, try this 3-line template, spoken at a pace your body can sustain. 1. Here's what I did that made it hard to stay with me. 2. Here's the part one was trying to protect in me. 3. Here's how I want to try again right now. The first line recognizes impact. The second line humanizes motive. The third line brings both of you back to the present. Keep it small, keep it honest, keep it slow. If the other person isn't ready, respect that reality and schedule a return. Repair cannot be coerced, only invited. Self-respect after the storm closing integration is incomplete if you only attend outward. The body stores arguments as posture and breath long after words end. After you speak your repair, close the loop privately. Lengthen your exhale, uncurl your hands, soften your jaw, and speak one sentence of self-acknowledgement you can believe. I chose a different way this time. Or if you missed the mark, I noticed it sooner and paused sooner. That counts. These small recognitions prevent the slide into shame that quietly resets you for the next explosion. The work is cumulative. Your capacity to pause grows because your nervous system trusts you to finish what you start. Integration takeaway. You do not need perfect language to remain trustworthy. You need a trustworthy process. Pause, own, repair, and speak from a pace your body can carry. The person who regulates first often saves both people from saying what cannot be unsaid. The person who repairs cleanly teaches both bodies that conflict does not equal danger. Over time, these practices become your relational baseline. You stop performing connection and begin living it. In the next episode, repair rituals will map concrete, repeatable sequences for reconnection in couples, families, friendships, and online spaces, so you're not guessing under pressure. We'll examine language that restores trust without sacrificing truth, the physiology of a successful start again, and how to build a relational culture where rupture doesn't become a reason to retreat. Thank you for staying with this conversation. Remember, it isn't eloquence that protects your relationships, it's the courage to pause, the honesty to own your state, and the steadiness to speak only from the part of you that can stand by the words tomorrow. Until next time, take one breath before the hard sentence and let it return you to yourself. You've been listening to Mirror Talk, the language of the nervous system. I'm James Miller.